What if the deadliest war humanity ever fought wasn't against any other country, but against a fly that eats you alive? Over the lush jungle of Panama, military grade planes roar low, slicing through the humid air. But instead of bomb, they unleash swarms. Cloud of buzzing metallic green insects tumble out, their wings catching the sunlight as they scatter. 100 millions of them every single week. But these aren't invaders, they are soldiers, tiny radioactive soldiers, in one of the humanity's strangest and most terrifying war. And the enemy, a monster so small that it can crawl into a cut and eats you alive from within. This is the story of flesh eating fly, a war fought for over 70 years, a war against an enemy that still stalks our world today, and a war that humanity can never truly win. Hi, and welcome back to the channel. This is the place where hidden battles, bizarre science, and strangest corner of history comes to light. Here, we just don't tell stories, we uncover truth that sounds too wild to be real. So stick around and let's explore it together. What this predator hunt is not the dead, not the weak, but the living. Deep in the tropics of the Americas lurks a creature that looks harmless, a fly shimmering in the sunlight, its body metallic blue-green and its eyes glowing red like jewels, but behind the beauty lies pure horror. It's called Cochlimia omnivorex, the screwworm fly. It literally means man-eater, and unlike the common housefly, this insect doesn't wait for something to die. No, it wants living flesh. Imagine this. You're hiking in a forest, you scrape your knee on a rock, you wipe the blood and think nothing of it. But hours later, something terrifying happens. Fly swarms the wound, laying tiny white eggs that look like grains of rice. Within 12 hours, those eggs hatch into larvae, maggots with sharp black mouth. And they don't crawl on the surface, they burrow deep in. They chew, they tear muscle fibers, and they feed as you scream in agony. And the worst part, they don't stop until you are dead or disfigured for life. The larva grows fatter, hungrier, expanding the wound as they feast. The smell of blood and infection attracts more flies, who lays more eggs, compounding the nightmare. Victims, whether cattle, wildlife, or human, sometimes collapse from the sheer pain of being eaten alive. What happened when humans accidentally create heaven for the worst enemy? The screwworm had existed for millennia, lurking quietly in the Americas, but then come the 20th century and millions of cows. Across Texas, Florida, and the southern US, ranchers built a booming livestock empire. Vast field of cattle stretches as far as the eye could see, and each one of those cows carried scratches, bites, and ticks, perfect entry point for screwworms. Suddenly, the parasite had an all-you-can-eat buffet. Calf died in droves. Ranchers pulled apart wounds to find these worms devouring muscle tissues while the animal is still in pain. Every fresh cut becomes an invitation for more flies. And here's the horror. Nothing worked. Rancher tried pouring chemical into the wound, burning them out, spraying the entire herd, but the flies returned again and again. So, how do you poison something that hides inside the living flesh without killing the host? By the 1930s, the US cattle industry was losing millions every year. Wildlife, deer, coyotes, even endangered species were suffering. Pets were at risk, and humans? They weren't safe either. Babies, children, and farmers reported infestation. It seems unstoppable. The screwworm wasn't just winning, it was multiplying. The nuclear solution. When bullets and poison failed, what's left? Radiation. In the 1950s, two American scientists, Edward Knipling and Raymond Bushland, proposed something so crazy, so outrageous that even their colleagues laughed. What if, they asked, we didn't kill the flies at all? What if we nuked them? Just enough to sterilize them? And here is the twisted logic. Female screwworm flies mate only once in 3 weeks of their lifespan. If that one mate is sterile, all of her eggs are worthless. Her bloodline dies instantly. So, the plan wasn't to fight the enemy head on, It was to trick the enemy into wiping themselves out. The idea became known as the sterile insect technique. Raise millions of screwworms in labs, expose the male carefully to measured radiation, then unleash them back into the wild. The female, tricked into mating these zombie males, and would waste their only chance to reproduce. On paper, it sounded impossible. How could sterile male even compete with the wild ones? How would you breed them enough? How would you convince the government to release billions of radioactive insects into the sky? But desperation makes people bold, and so the experiment began. The first battlefield. What happened when an entire island became ground zero for an insect apocalypse? The first real test came in 1954 in a Caribbean island infested with screwworms. Scientists turned slaughterhouses into fly factories. Trays of rotting beef, horse meat, and animal blood became nursery for millions of larvae. The stench was overwhelming, but to screwworm it was paradise. And then the plane came. Week after week, sterile males were released across the island. At first, nothing happened. Cows still suffered, wildlife still carried crawling wounds, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the screwworms began to shrink. Egg stopped hatching, calves healed, and then silence. The parasite was gone. Wiped out, for the first time in history, humanity had beaten the screwworm. The impossible had worked. The Continental War. Now, the battlefield was no longer an island, it was an entire continent. By the 1960s, the US launched the largest insect eradication program in history. Factory roses in Texas and Mexico churning out sterile flies by billions. Ranchers once on the brink of ruin now had hope. Every week, airplane releases boxes filled with buzzing cloud of sterilized screwworms. But breeding them required unimaginable resources. One factory used 70 tons of meat and 12,000 gallons of blood every week to feed larvae. Workers wore masks and the smell seeped into everything. Even airlines had to spray perfume into their shipment to make it bearable. It was a war fought with beef, blood, and science. By 1980, screwworms have been pushed out of the USA entire region, and the entire region declared victory. For the first time, ranchers across the North America were safe. The paradise of screwworms is now gone. The parasite have been eradicated, at least above the Rio Grande. But the war wasn't over. But what if the parasite escaped into an entirely new continent? In 1988, nightmare became reality. Somehow, screwworm appeared in Libya, not Africa. Nobody knows exactly how, but it might be that the livestock shipment from South America carried these screwworms. But this implication was horrifying. If this parasite spread down the Nile across Africa's vast savanna, millions of animals and people would suffer. Entire economy could collapse. The world mobilized instantly. Hundreds of millions of sterilized flies were flown into Africa. Plane crisscrossed the skies. Ground team inspected animal one by one. Imagine villagers watching the plane rain down buzzing flies and being told it was for their own benefit and safety. It sounded insane, right? But once again, it worked. Within 4 months, the outbreak was contained. Africa was safe for now. But how do you stop an enemy that covers 2 continents? South America was still infested. The Amazon rainforest was too wild, too vast, too politically divided to conquer. So scientists devised a new plan. Build a permanent barrier. At the narrowest point of Central America, Panama, they constructed the ultimate fly factory. Every week, it produced 100 million sterilized fly. Plane released them in grids across the jungle. Each flight path spaced exactly 1.6 kilometers apart. An invisible wall was made, not of stone, but of buzzing flesh. This biological wall stopped screwworm from moving north. For decades, it held firm. Ranchers in the USA and Mexico slept easy, knowing Panama was absorbing the threat. But walls do not last forever. In 2016, screwworms somehow slipped past the wall. In the Florida, Keys deers were found staggering through the forest, chunk of flesh falling from the body. The parasite was back. Planes scrambled, factory pumped sterile flies into overdrive, and just in time the outbreak was contained, but the victory didn't last long. In 2023, the walls faltered again. Screwworms exploded across Panama and Costa Rica, spreading faster than the factories could keep up. By 2024, Mexico was fighting infestation again. For the first time in decades, humanity wasn't winning. It was barely holding on. And today, the war rages on. The war we can never win. So what happened if we lose? If screwworms establish themselves in North America, the consequences will be catastrophic. Billions in livestock losses, wildlife population devastated, pets mutilated, and yes, humans once again at the risk of being eaten alive. This isn't just about animals, it's about survival. And the truth is, this is a war humanity can never truly win. At best, it's a war we can keep fighting forever. An eternal stalemate against an enemy that can never give up. But maybe this war isn't about flies. Maybe it is about us. Think about it. Nuking flies sounded insane until it worked. The sterile insect technique is now used against other pests, like fruit flies. Entire region has been saved by an idea so crazy it almost never happened. So what else could we solve if we dare to think this way? Maybe the lesson of the screwworm war isn't that the nature is cruel, but it's that imagination is the sharpest weapon we have. So, the next time you hear a plane humming overhead, remember, it might not be carrying passengers, it might be carrying soldiers. Millions of tiny buzzing soldiers in a war you never know existed. If this story gave you chill, if it made you see the hidden war around us, then share it. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Because the world is full of invisible battles, and I'll be here to show them to you. Because the truth is simple. We all are living in a world full of war we don't even realize happening. That's it for now. Stay safe and take care.